Hello everybody and welcome to the Chiltern IOSH virtual meeting. So this is our agenda for the session, which will finish around 2:30 p.m. Our aim has always been to keep members connected at this time. My name is Louise Hosking and I'm the Chair of the Chiltern Branch, and I'm going to be your host for this session today. For your added security, we do lock the meeting at around 1:15, which means you will not be able to gain access to the session after this time or if your connection drops out. We are recording the session, but only the speaker and the slides are going to be recorded, and you will be able to see the session back on the IOSH website. Please do be patient with the technology, as we're linking people from different parts of the world, and occasionally we do have the odd glitch. Now, we would like this session to be super interactive, so please do use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Let us know who you are, where you are. If it's your birthday today, please use your name so that we can see who you are as well. And we would like, if you would like to ask a question, I'll be taking questions from the chat box, and you can also raise your hand and we can let you speak as well. If you are not speaking, we do ask you to keep your controls to mute, because it's amazing what these speakers can actually pick up. And you know, we will let you speak, so it's very much a general branch meeting. Where we can, we will try and refer to as many of the Q&As as we can, but sometimes we don't quite make it, so we may be able to run some additional sessions afterwards. So we're delighted today to bring Dr. Hyacinth Guy into our session, who's speaking to us all the way from the Caribbean. But before we introduce Dr. Hyacinth Guy, I'm going to run through a few pointers. So first of all, in IOSH Chiltern, we love Twitter, so please do use Twitter and talk about your experiences today. We also want to stay as connected as we possibly can, so we've got a very active LinkedIn page, so please do access that and continue having the discussion and the debate, because we're here for our members. So our session today is all around human capital, and I'm going to talk about that some more and why it's important to IOSH. Our next session is not going to be until the 16th of September, and that's going to be a joint session with the Yorkshire branch, and that's going to have a wellbeing theme to it, and we're going to have some interesting speakers. So we're going to talk about inclusion and diversity, we're going to talk about sleep health, and the one that everyone's talking about is corporate psychopaths. So that's definitely one not to be missed. On the 30th of September, we're talking about domestic animal hazards. Now, we haven't booked any more sessions as yet, because we're running a member survey currently, because we want to know which sessions, what's the time that you can access the best, and what are the sessions that you would like to see us hosting. So we've got a whole catalogue of suggestions in the background, but we want to hear from you. So please do access this survey, and if I can ask LinkedIn Luke to add that to the chat. We're trying to get it's going to run until the end of the week, so please do access that and let us know your thoughts and what you'd like to see going forward. So last time we had a fantastic session. So Tudor Williams came on the line. He was joined by Hitesh and Shireen, and we were talking about how to progress from graduate status through to chartered status. Now, there are other sessions that other branches are hosting at this time, so it's a great time to gain information from the sessions that, and not just at Chiltern but across the networks. And if you miss that session, you can access it via our YouTube page. So the YouTube page link is there on the screen, and I will be adding these slides to our LinkedIn page directly after this session. So just a little bit of IOSH news, just very briefly. As a committee, I think we have pretty much knocked it out of the ballpark while we've been in lockdown, but we are very conscious that member needs may be changing as we get into September, October, into the autumn. Now, we're very keen that we create a branch that isn't just about Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, and Buckinghamshire, where we're based, but we, as you're going to see today, we have speakers and members in our committee from around the world. So we really have gone global, and we've introduced additional responsibilities and ways of running the branch. So if it does appeal to you to actually become part of the committee, then we will always, we love meeting new people. If you've got something to offer, then we're here. Do visit the other branches, because there's some really fantastic sessions going on at the moment. The IOSH, the central IOSH webinars are still going strong. Those are now every other Thursday, and the next one is going to be on the 3rd of September. So that's going to be hosted by our president, Dr. Andrew Sherman, and Bev Messenger is going to be on there as well. So do register for that and access that session. And talking about IOSH President, Dr. Andrew Sherman, he's just recorded another message for members. So the link to that message is on there. Do have a look at that. ISA are launching a Vision Zero Leading Indicators webinar, which is going to be on, I didn't put the date on that, that's going to be on Friday, I think it's 11 o'clock. So if that's something that appeals to you in terms of statistics, and it kind of ties in with human capital and what we're going to be talking about today, do access that session. IOSH are looking for members to share their experiences over this period, because let's face it, OSH professionals have really stood up to the challenge, and we want to try and capture as much of that information and what everybody's been up to. So do access that link and provide information on, just case studies. It might just be ordinary things that you've been doing that have had extraordinary consequences and have supported and helped business out there at this time. And this week we reached 1,000 members, 1,000 student members. So the student membership criteria is still something that's fairly new, and we managed to reach 1,000 members this week. So that's really good news as well. So I've just raised a separate slide around this. So in terms of IOSH news, one of the big pieces of news is that the results from the membership review have now been published on the website. So I've just added a link to that, and it kind of links into the session that we had last week. So I'm not going to go into information on that now, because I think you're all here to hear from Hyacinth and not me. So do follow that link, and at some point we will be looking at how we relay information regarding that. But there's going to be a whole set of comms coming out from IOSH to reassure members that are on their professional journey that it is an improvement on where we have come from. So do access that link and start looking at it. But as I say, there'll be loads of information regarding that. So in terms of what we're going to do today, I just wanted to sort of link in really. I'm really excited about this session today that we've got with Dr. Hyacinth. Human capital is one of IOSH's 6 key pillars, and I think it's the one that we kind of least understand, and it's kind of least tangible. So it's really fantastic that we've got Hyacinth Guy here today to sort of demystify some of, what are we talking about when we talk about sustainability and human capital. And it is an IOSH key 6 pillar, and I think because of everything that we've gone through, we're looking at people in a very different way at the moment. So the final, in terms of the last quarter of 2020, again, this is going to be something that IOSH are looking at in general terms as well. So I've just added a link here to some information that is on the IOSH website that talks about the Global Summit report that from 2019, which is still very much relevant. And this is all about, you know, how do we agree sets of standards that actually put people and well-being at the fore? How do we help organisations to create their strategies? How do we look at consistent reporting? And sometimes we kind of apply this to big companies, but it comes all the way through the supply chain. So it is important. And I think as we go into this last quarter, there's going to be a lot more information around human capital and how we can influence this in a positive way. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Kurt, now. So Kurt is also you're in Trinidad at the moment, aren't you, Kurt?
Yes, I certainly am.
So Kurt is one of our international committee members. So I'm going to hand over to Kurt now to introduce Dr. Hyacinth, who we are delighted to have on our session today. So over to you, Kurt.
So good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because I'm not sure where people are participating from. I've seen at least one in Sweden and one in Italy. So I am in Trinidad together with our guest speaker this morning. So I've been given the privilege to introduce Hyacinth, and she has quite an impressive CV. So she asked that we just pick out the key points. So Hyacinth Guy has been a practitioner of organizational development and strategic human resource management for more than 35 years. With 25 of those years being at the executive and senior management level in diverse organizations in the public and private business sectors. She is the principal director of Hyacinth Guy Human Resource Company, registered as a sole proprietor since 2017. Dr. Guy has a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from Nova Southeastern University, an MBA from Andrews University in Michigan, an MA from the Institute of Social Studies, Rotterdam, Netherlands, and a BSc in Social Science from the University of the West Indies. Dr. Guy is also a certified human resource practitioner with certifications from the Human Resource Certification Institute, the Society of Human Resource Management, and a certified workforce planner from the Human Capital Institute. She's a trained personal and organizational development, life success coach and facilitator of the Proctor Gallagher Institute and a certified mediation teacher and health practitioner with the Chopra Center. So with that said, I would like to introduce Dr. Guy, and I'm handing over to her.
Thank you very much, Kurt. I appreciate that introduction. Good day, everyone. Hello to everyone, all different parts of the world. Thank you for inviting me to make this presentation. I feel honored to have been invited, and I'm looking forward to interacting with all 38 of you, I see, participants in this session here this morning. Thank you very much. So I'll go straight into the presentation, and I'll put up on the screen the presentation that I will share. And just so that we can have a smooth bandwidth, I'll just take my video off so that it can run smoothly. So here we are. Just a confirmation that everyone is seeing that?
Yes, yeah. We are.
Okay, great. So again, thank you very much. I really do appreciate getting the opportunity to do this presentation with you this morning. So you asked, and we had some discussions, and you said, you know, what were some of the options for presenting. You are an international IOSH group, and you know, I considered, well, what can I really share, you know, based on what my background is and what my knowledge is. and how can what I share resonate with a team like this. So in preparing for it, I thought I should probably do a little research on you and see what you do. And I went on your website and I saw all of these nice summary reports. You have summary reports and you have full reports. I saw these summary reports and I started to look through these summary reports that you had. And I'm reading them and I'm thinking, oh, this would be so useful for HR people to read, because such rich information and presented in such a nice, concise way. And I perused a lot of them, and I saw three that resonated with me. One was managing your people safely. It was an IOSH report that you did in partnership with YouGov. Another one was promoting active safety leadership and safety culture, advice and performance. And when I read through those reports, I found that they contained information that seemed to align with the topic that I was looking to do, which was the whole concept of human capital and how we develop human capital and take advantage of human capital to release inertia and have people achieve their full potential in the organization. So I said, okay, this is resonating with me. Let me see then how I could take this and turn it into something that is aligned with the topic for today. And I zeroed into this one here, managing your people safely, the IOSH report that you did in partnership with YouGov. And that report asked a question, and it said, in part, it was a survey, but in part it said, how do people who train line managers and say, for example, safety persons who train line managers, how do you ensure that managers have the right level of skills, knowledge, and understanding to manage people safely? And they gave some responses to those, to the questions that they asked. It said, in the main questionnaire, it said that 53% of the people that you surveyed said that they have invested in health and safety training for managers, and they have used an external provider. They have indicated that they use IOSH quite regularly, IOSH quite regularly. And 1 in 5 of the participants, predominantly SMEs, said they had no form of health and safety training at all for their line managers. But the findings in general did indicate that there was a widespread recognition in business of the importance of the line manager in safeguarding people at work. But they had differences in terms of who is responsible for it primarily. But what really resonated with me is that the report towards the end, it said that competence is the key to running any business well or performing in any role with confidence and skill. And it said knowledge results from a person's experience, but very often people already learn from the school of hard knocks. You know, having demonstrated something, having experienced something, that is really what delivers learning. And it continued to say that in health and safety, that usually means someone has been harmed, which is morally unforgivable. So the whole issue of competence was brought into focus for me. And I said, you know what, I could look at the whole aspect of human capital, which I'm happy to hear this morning is one of your key pillars. I could look at the aspect of human capital and share with the team a perspective on how we can establish systems in our organizations that could blend that knowledge that people have, the skills and the abilities with competence. Because there seemed, as we have known in HR for some time, to be a disconnect between what people know, their knowledge and their skills, and what they actually do in the job. We have been operating in organizations, and I'm sure safety professionals have been operating in organizations where you do a whole lot of training, and we know that people know what to do. But then sometimes you see a little disconnect between what they know and what actually happens in the workplace. And this has been studied, And we have implemented systems in organizations and models in organizations which will help us to bridge that gap. So what my objectives are this morning is to share a perspective on how we can establish systems in our organizations that blend knowledge, skills, and abilities with competence. Competence that this report on managing your people safely spoke to. And also to create an awareness of some HRM systems that can bring out the full potential of employees in organizations. And I'll just touch a little bit, because as we go into this, we are saying we are at a certain place, and I'm sure many organizations would already have competency-based management models established. Some don't. So in sharing this, I recognize that there is always the need, and people ask, well, how do we move from here to there? So I'll just touch a little bit towards the end on change management and how we deal with a situation where we are changing from one system to another. Right, so the question is, why is this important? Well, we recognize that companies are organizations of people and processes. And we spend a lot of money on training people and trying to get them to do what? To know more. Because we think that when people know more, they will do better. Theoretically, yes. But sometimes in our organizations, we don't see that. So people know, but we don't see it translated into the doing. And we spend a lot of money on teaching them, and we spend a lot of money on process improvement with the hope that people we will see different results in some areas. And we have studied this over the years, and we came to an understanding that the problem must be that people are not doing what they already know how to do. And what have we been doing? We have been retraining, trying to keep trying to throw more training at them, implement more systems, when really and truly, we probably should have been focusing on getting people to do more with what they already know. So it tells us then that if we want to deliver results, that those results have to be getting people to do more with what they know. And we recognize that there's a gap between what people know and what it is they do in the organization. So education is not so much about teaching them what they do not know, but rather teaching people to behave as they do not behave right now. Because we know that people have the information, they have the knowledge, the organization may have already have the processes, but we're not seeing the results. And we have seen over time that the introduction of competency-based models in organization bridges the gap between what people know and what people do. And that really puts us in a position where we get the best out of the human capital in the organization. So let's talk a little bit about what is a competence, because your summary report on managing your people safely talked about competence. And it said that competence is the key to running any business well or performing in any role with confidence and skill. Knowledge results from experience, but too often it is the school of hard knocks that delivers this learning. Yes? So there was that recognition. So the question then is, how do we use competencies in the organization? So your report said competence. In HR, we say, what is a competency? Yes? So, and there are some definitions of competence, of what is a competency. It is the combination of the underpinning of knowledge to perform a task, the necessary skills to complete the task, and the necessary work ethic and attributes such as attitude when completing a task. And we have three definitions, and they more or less say the same thing, that it is knowledge, and we have an acronym, we say KSAO, knowledge, abilities, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other traits. And the other traits is where we really want to zero in on. And some of these definitions have come from the Society for Human Resource Management, which is the Society for HR in the United States. And I took the definitions from there. So if we understand that this is a competency, let's talk a little bit about where this is coming from and a little bit about the history of it. It was recognized by Dr. David McClellan in the 60s that good performance didn't always arise from the scores that people got in tests. It didn't. And during the 70s, we did more studies and we came to know that in addition to what people would have learned in a particular field, that there were other attributes that really accounted for success. And McClellan later on saw that students who did poorly in universities, as long as they passed, did just as well in life. They did some longitudinal studies to show that. Did just as well in life as top students. So then what accounted for it? It was more than a score on a test paper. Yeah, and they concluded that it really had to do with some hidden traits and qualitative behaviors that employees either bring to the workplace or they don't bring it to the workplace. And that was the difference between success or failure. Yeah, so if we look at it in terms of a figure, and is demonstrated as the iceberg model for competencies. And it helps us to understand performance in the organization and success in an organization. What is happening and what we see and what we have seen for a very long time in HR, and probably we missed the boat on this for some time, is what somebody brings in terms of their knowledge and skills. And what we weren't seeing for a while is the attitude, the traits, the thinking styles, the self-image, the organizational fit. Now, guaranteed over the last many years, we have been delving into this, and we have been trying to understand, in addition to what technical competencies people bring to the organization, how can we assess and how can we test to know that people are bringing the right attitude and the traits and thinking styles and so on. And we have made some strides in it. But in order to move forward, that understanding has to move from beyond just the HR field, and it has to move throughout the organization. And when we implement competency-based models in the organization, we have to involve everyone because it is at the heart of performance in the organization. So this iceberg model, it is showing us that what we see is really just above the surface of the water. And a competency has some competence which are visible, like knowledge and skills, but there are so many other traits which are beneath the surface and which for the most part we don't see. But it doesn't mean that the person doesn't have it and that person demonstrates it in the workplace. Sometimes it is beneficial, sometimes it is not. But we have to know from beforehand, what is this person going to bring? And that is where we implement competency-based systems in the organization to understand that, to know what the person is bringing, and then also to evaluate the person as that person continues to perform, so that we know that they're demonstrating the right skills and competencies that we want in the organization. So how do we use competencies in the organization? Implement a competency-based management model. It is a guideline usually developed by an HR department, but it sets out the specific skills, knowledge, and behavioral requirements that enable an employee to perform the job successfully. And a competency-based management model will be, it's like putting, architecture in the organization, because we go through the organization, we go through departments, we go through jobs, and we identify the collection of competencies that are needed for effective job performance. And generally, these competencies are in three categories. We identify core competencies. These are competencies that everybody should have in the organization. I'll show you a little bit more about what these are in a couple of slides down. Behavioral competencies, which are specific behaviors required to be demonstrated in specific jobs. These are behaviors. And then there are job-specific competencies, which are functional competencies, the things that you need to know and do to be successful in that job. And we then use these to design and develop recruitment and selection systems, our talent management systems, and our performance management systems. So if we look a little at the benefits to the organization, it can set a clear direction for the workforce, and it aligns with organizational goals, and it enables HR to have a deeper understanding of all the employees. When we do this in organization, we have to engage line management, we have to engage subject matter experts in order to help us define these competencies. And one thing I have noticed in organizations where I have implemented competency-based management models is that by including stakeholders, a wide array of stakeholders, that people take ownership of it. In particular, the employee takes ownership of it, because the employee himself or herself, they come to understand, okay, I have been struggling in a particular area and perhaps this is why. So maybe I will take a step to move in the direction of bridging whatever gaps I may have in the organization. So we talked about the types of competencies. We have generic or core competencies. And usually when you're establishing a competency-based model in an organization, what you're doing is establishing competencies that everybody in the organization should demonstrate. And the organization decides on what these competencies are. They could be customer focus, it could be communication, but everybody must demonstrate these competencies. And then we identify behavioral competencies, which are essential for effective performance in a role. So for example, a role of, say, an auditor might need analytical thinking. And then we identify behavioral competencies that are management and supervisory specific, right? So managers and supervisors should be able to plan and organize, make decisions, delegate, and so on. And then in each job, there is a technical competency, and that is specific competencies which are considered essential to perform in the organization within a defined technical or functional area, right? So if we see an example of this, and these are examples of competencies. You know, you may look at a job and you may say, okay, I need somebody to be adaptable in this job. I need somebody to demonstrate commitment, creativity, teamwork. But the organization decides on the core, which applies to all. It decides on the behavioral, you know, possibly from among this group, which applies to specific jobs, and then it identifies functional competencies. So for example, if it's a safety manager, that person must know some technical safety things, and that together makes up the architecture of competencies in the organization. So moving along, so what it does is that it helps us to bridge that gap between what people know and what people do. And we use it in two primary areas: recruitment and selection and talent management. Because I want to know that when I have a position to fill in the organization, that position is very well defined. And I know what the results that person should be giving me in the organization. Not so much effort, but more the results. So we design from the time the job is advertised, we design it to reflect that. What behaviors we want demonstrated and what actual results we want to see. So we use it in our recruitment and selection. And when you come to do, say, an interview that is competency-based, you'll see how different it is from doing an interview that we would have done traditionally in the past, where we are seeking to understand what people know. Yeah, so we'll ask, what is this? Now we ask, tell me about a time that you did so and so and so. And we probe and we ask, you know, deeper questions and so on. And we also introduce it into our talent management systems, in our performance management systems, in our training and development systems. And it could help us to establish standards. It can help employees to plot a course because they themselves understand where there are gaps. It helps us to assess bench strength and to do workforce and succession planning and to do it better. So if we look at a practical example, we have a department that is in a say an operations area. It's a technical department. You have a manager, you have a supervisor, and you have senior technicians here. You have junior technicians, and say you have trainees. So we're talking about implementing a competency-based management system in the organization. So let's say we would have gone through the organization and we would have identified that there are core competencies that everybody should demonstrate, from the manager all the way down to the trainee. That might be something like client focus or customer focus. And then there are certain competencies that the senior technician should demonstrate. There are certain ones that the junior technician should demonstrate, and so on. So there are competencies, behavioral competencies, that different roles should demonstrate. And then there are functional competencies. So if you look at the architecture, let's take one which is a senior technician. And if you look at the competency architecture for that particular job, you would see this is how we would roll that out in the organization. And this is one job, and we can do that for every job in the organization. We say, okay, this job has some core competencies. It must demonstrate work ethics and values, teamwork, health and safety. Yes? And then there's a level of proficiency, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, because the competency-based systems give you levels of proficiency. So a senior technician is asked to demonstrate this proficiency at a level 3, but a trainee might be asked to demonstrate this proficiency at a level 1, perhaps. Yes? And then that job of senior technician has some job family or behavioral competencies. Again, concern for safety, interactive communication. It must have achievement orientation, which is show me the results. And it must manage resources in a particular way. And then there are the position-specific competencies, which are the actual things that the person does. And this is where we used to focus a whole lot on before. You know, the top of the iceberg, the knowledge and the skills. But we did not focus enough on how they did it. They troubleshooted, yes, but did you do it with an end in mind? Or were you just satisfied to show good effort? You know, how did you use your resources when you did it? Did you have a really high overtime figure? Or did you have a poor interpersonal relationships, and you know, you left probably a whole host of a set of dissatisfied people in the organization when you're doing it? So what is important, but also the how is important. And then we can even make this more granular in terms of how this should be done. All of this then constitutes the competency architecture for this particular job. So if you're thinking about hiring a senior technician, then immediately I know as an HR professional how I should design the advertisement for this job. If I want to select the person and go through an interview process, I know how I should design that interview in order to bring out these competencies. And I, as an HR professional, should be training my line managers and my other subject matter experts to do the same, because everybody has to be on the same page with this. Okay? And if I want to manage that person's performance, again, there is a way that we design our performance management and evaluation systems that will allow us to evaluate how did this person perform in these areas. So there's a really nice line of sight between the job and the overall organization deliverables. And that really is where we see the gap between what people know and what they do being bridged. And we see organizations, and studies have shown that organizations have shown greater success where these competency-based models have been implemented, right? And if we look at, you know, the levels, this is how the levels move from level 1 to 5. We take a competency, a behavioral competency, or this could be a core competency of client focus. And you may say, I want a trainee technician to demonstrate these competencies at this level, or maybe level 2. But I want my technician, my senior technician, to have at least a level 3 or probably a 4. Certainly the manager should be demonstrating that at a level 5. And then we say, you know, why are we putting these things in place? Are there arguments for it? Yeah, and certainly there are. Organizations may have to comply with regulatory, corporate, and occupational standards. I worked in an organization, it was an airline, where we actually had to have something like this in place, where we showed what knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies people had and how we were measuring it. And we had to put a lot of focus on the behavioral aspects, because after all, there's a really heavy health and safety aspect of work in the maintenance areas in an airline. So that had to be so transparent. We had to engage the employees and managers in the development of this competency model. And then we had to roll that out through the organization, of course, which required a change management approach. Yes, so there are arguments for it. And people have also said, but there are arguments against it. It's difficult to implement. Yes, it is. It takes time. But once you have made that investment in that organization, then what you are doing is, auditing it, editing it over time, and keeping it aligned with what the organization's objectives are later on. And yes, we know sometimes it's difficult to implement. Some people say, well, how do you really evaluate? How do you train somebody to think strategically? Yes, I've come in here to do a particular job, but in order to do it well, I have to think strategically. How do you train somebody to think strategically? And we have been able to develop systems which help people in that area. And that's where coaching is becoming so important in organizations, because sometimes it requires one-to-one interactions with the employee so that the employee gets an awareness of where he or she is at. And something as simple as, okay, thinking strategically, well, let's try to keep up to date with trends. Let's review the company's position. Let's develop business relationships with other people. So you actually work with that person in order to help them come to terms with where they are and where they need to be, and work with them over a period of time. Or it could be putting them back in a classroom to learn something and then assessing it over time and see how they demonstrate it. So there are arguments for, there are arguments against, but the research has shown that companies that have implemented it have really shown success and increases in how they have in their bottom line. And we need to understand that it's different from a job description. A job description is a general summary of the skills required for a job, but a competency-based model provides specific behaviors that an employee must demonstrate on the job to be successful. So, one is the what and the other one is the how. Who identifies it? Experts can do it, HR specialists can do it, job analysts can do it, psychologists can do it, but importantly, it must be done in consultation with line managers and subject matter experts in the area, current and past role holders and other key stakeholders. How do we formulate it? The Society for Human Resource Management has a best practice, and that can be researched, and we ourselves in the field, we have been guided by this. There is a specific process that we follow in order to formulate a competency. And if you look at an example, if you want to formulate a competency that is titled customer relationships, well, first we have to define it. And again, by engaging the stakeholders, we get together, we define it. So there are organizations out there like HRSG that have put out competency dictionaries where you can actually go and see where it has been defined before. And then you can subscribe to that and probably take that and use it and modify it to suit your own circumstances. You identify sub-competencies, you identify behaviors and the standards that the person should be performing at in demonstrating those competencies. We use it in our recruitment and selection. We incorporate it into job descriptions, performance management, and we train, we coach, and we mentor persons to demonstrate the behavioral competencies. If I am therefore hiring an auditor, I will say, okay, I have to identify core behavioral and technical competencies. Yeah, I would have gotten together with my stakeholders and I would have identified that analytical thinking is a key behavioral competency for an auditor. Attention to detail, integrity. Yeah? And then there are the technical things. They have to plan, organize, and complete audits. They have to manage risk. Yeah? So it feeds itself into our recruitment and selection processes, and it feeds itself into our performance management processes. Yeah? So we can establish this into our performance management process where we define the outcomes and the standards. This tells us the what must be accomplished. The competencies tell us the how it should be accomplished. And there's a benefit to using competencies in managing performance, because it sets the bar for performance at a level which allows people to really release that latent potential that they have. Some people are afraid to perform, they are afraid to take a step, they're afraid to use their initiative, and that is already in them latently. As I said earlier, people are not doing what they already know. But when we use these systems and we make them transparent and we roll them out through the organization, and you encourage discussion on it, then really people develop trust, they develop confidence, and you find that they are quite willing to step forward and show a little bit more of themselves. Be a high-performing employee and we get a high-performing organization. Yeah. So when I had talked about the iceberg model, I said that, you know, we tend to focus traditionally, even though that has been changing over a number of years, on the knowledge, what people know, and the skill, what they can do. But we ignored a lot about that piece under the iceberg, under the water, of how people saw themselves and what traits they brought to the organization. You know, and for the most part, when we ignore that, you know, people come into the organization as a whole. And when they come into the organization, then we start to see behaviors that we found just didn't mesh with what it is we were looking for. And I indicated that that is what, you know, put us in the direction of trying to bridge that gap between what people know and what they do, hence the introduction of competency-based management models. Now, when we do that in an organization, and my experience has taught me that when we implement these things in an organization, they have to be implemented very, very carefully. And we have to know that what this is a whole change to what would have existed before. I've implemented these in organizations, and we have had to take a whole change management approach. Where we didn't do that, then, you know, for the most part, we failed. But when we recognize that this is a change in how people behaved before, sometimes how HR people behaved before, because they were accustomed interviewing in a particular way, recruiting in a particular way, managing skills, you know, looking at a certificate and saying, oh, this person has a 4.0 GPA, this person is better than this person who has a 3, and not looking at other traits. And they themselves had a hard time changing. And we had to recognize that we had to treat implementation of something like this as a change management initiative. We had to recognize that it is a change, accept that people in the organization will resist change, and then help them change in the organization. Because you would always have resistance to change in organizations, and Harvard study has shown that resistance to change is normal. Resistance to change is not the end of the story, but really the beginning. It is where we say, okay, we want to implement something new. We know that it is going to be, we're going to have resistance. What then is our next step? How do we help people? And how do we help them navigate their way through that change? And we recognize that there will always be a competing commitment, pushing back up and resisting the change. And that competing commitment is what people knew before, because people want to remain in their comfort zones, and they want to remain the way they have been doing something. And so therefore that change has to be managed. And we have to recognize that in general, there's a concept called active inertia in an organization. And it is the tendency to follow established behavioral patterns, even when you have dramatic environmental shifts. And that's because people become stuck in the modes of thinking and working that they think brought success in the past. So they perpetuate their tried and true activities. So we have to recognize that, and we have to help the organization go through change. And there's a whole new study coming out now under the umbrella of the neuroscience of change. And that is helping us in the HR field understand how to take people from one place to the next. We are now understanding that change requires us to think about something new, to believe in it, and to act on it. And we know that when we are embarking on a change process, it will bring fear. Because people will say, I don't know how to do this. I don't want to lose my status and control. And that usually is the thing that brings the resistance. People change in one of two ways, either an emotionally shocking experience, or they become aware of the need to change, they study, and they develop engagement processes in the organization. For the most part, we want to guide our organization through change by lifting their awareness, helping them to study and become aware of the path that we have to walk in order to get from here to where we want to go. And we don't want to wait for an emotionally shocking experience to tumult us into change. No. So we take a handle on it. We have to recognize it. We have to navigate our way through it. And the organization has to become change adaptable. And the whole concept of implementing our competency-based management model in an organization to develop human capital, to release that inertia and to get people to show their full potential is about becoming change adaptable. So we lean on some of the work that is being done right now in the field of neuroscience of change, and we help our organizations go through that change, because we know that if people believe something, they will act on it. So we have to help people change their belief about the organization, and we have to help them change their belief about themselves and what they might perceive as their own limitations. So we help them change organization thinking, change their own thinking, change their belief, and we will see new results coming into the organization. And HR has a key role to play in changing those beliefs. So the area we are leaning on now to help us with organization change is neuroscience and the science of neuroplasticity of the brain. It is helping us to understand how change works. It is that the work in that field is showing us that it is possible for employees and for human beings to unlearn new habits and do it at any age, that our brains are not hardwired, and in fact, you can teach an old dog new tricks. It comes with becoming aware of what we are doing now is not working for us, identifying a new behavior and repeating that behavior over time. And studies have shown that when you do that, your brains grow new neurons and actually change to reflect the new habits. Yeah? So even though we have a bias for the status quo and it's hard to change, we know that we can awaken our brains to new things in the organization. And repetition is really the key to those new habits. Yeah? And we can become change adaptable by becoming aware of the need, adopting those new habits and repeating it over time. And this is something that I experienced in an organization that I worked in a couple of years ago, where we actually had to, you set up your change management teams, and you had to always be on the alert for what is happening in the organization. You implement something, you made people aware of the need to change. You engage them in the process, and you started the process of the new behaviors in the organization. You always have to be on the lookout for slippage. There's always going to be some little pockets around the organization where somebody gets frustrated or somebody feels threatened and they say, no, I can't do this. And they're probably leading a little revolt and decide to say, well, this is not the way we are going to do something. Always have to be on the lookout for it. And as you do it, you keep your communication lines open, you celebrate your small wins. And you know that a lot of how people change and a lot of that change effort comes from employees. They know what to do, but they probably don't have the language and the authority to do it. Managers may have the language and authority, but sometimes they don't know what to do. So that's why you have to work with both. And the model that I would leave you here for organization change is a simple model. When we want to implement something in an organization, so for example, we want to implement a competency-based management model in an organization, and we know, we have done the studies, we know that there is value in implementing that. So we go and we tell people that this is what we have to do in the organization. But very often, when we go, we say, okay, I've communicated this, I have told people this, I've said why it is important, and then we want people to act on that. So often we want to move from communicate to act. And for the most part, we ignore this major piece in the middle here, which is to connect with people. And connecting with people is engaging them in the process, having them to be a part of the process, to buy into the process, to feel that they are co-creating the process. And when you get that, when you communicate, yes, I'm going to tell you, but I'm also going to engage you, then you will find that action becomes automatic. Yeah? And people will move in the direction of the goals because they feel that they are a part of selecting the goals. So to summarize, a competency is a knowledge, skill, ability, and other characteristics, or a group of characteristics, which when you apply it in an integrated manner in an organization and in a role, it will help the organization and people to achieve success. And if you take a whole competency-based management approach to an organization, it can help you bridge the gap between what people already know and what they do. So the money that we have been throwing on training, which we know we have to train people, but the frustrations that we experience where we say, but I've done this training already. Now there's some training that you have to do on a recurrent basis, fine. But then there's training that you do, and then you say, but people have been trained to do this. Why it is I'm not seeing the results? Then you know that what you should really be focusing on is how to get people to do what they already know. And that gets to the below the surface, which is the behaviors, the traits, the attitudes. That is what we really have to work with. And the introduction of a competency-based model in an organization requires a change management approach. And that approach recognizes that it is a behavioral change. And to change behavior takes time. It involves increasing people's awareness, helping them to identify the actions, the new actions that they must take, and to have those actions repeated over time. Because after all, it is repetition of past actions that got us here. Yeah? So in summary, it's communicate, connect, and act. I thank you all for listening to me. I think I've been speaking for about 40 minutes. I thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
That is just amazing. I could listen to your voice and the birds singing in the background all day. So thank you for that. There are some questions that have come in, and actually people have been sharing some really fantastic links as well. So we'll make sure that those links go at least onto our LinkedIn page via LinkedIn, Luke. But that was fantastic. I think one of the takeaways for me, Hyacinth, was somebody once said to me, training can't replace good management.
Yes. Yeah.